Hey everyone, welcome to the other episode of the George Poo Show. I'm your host George Poo, and then with us is our co-host Soham. So this past week, there's something really serious. I think we need to cover on the pod, although we're not a political pod, but I think something at this magnitude needs to be at least having a discussion on. And I'm sure our listeners know what I'm talking about. It is basically the former U.S. President Donald Trump said basically last Saturday that he is expecting an indictment in the coming week, which is last week. So although that didn't happen, I think that still can be brought up to charges this week. So essentially, I don't know how familiar you are with the whole situation. I know it's all over news, especially all over Twitter, the social media platforms. Not a lot on the mainstream side. So what are you hearing from this?
Yeah, no, basically exactly what you said. I think Trump just let out a post saying he's expecting this Tuesday that he was going to get arrested over the whole Stormy Daniel incident about him, which in general it was supposed to be a misdemeanor, right? He falsified legal expenses for what was supposed to be like a payoff for Stormy Daniels.
Yeah.
So that in general is supposed to be a misdemeanor, and then it's become like a big thing about the fact that it's a former president of the United States that's gonna happen this too. So there's been like a pretty big echo chambers, I think, on both sides. Like both sides of the coin on this are very very loud about which way they want to see this go, and I think we're not gonna know what happens until the shoe actually drops and Trump actually does end up getting arrested.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of things to unpack. Let's go to the very beginning. I think the suit is, as you said, is related to the hush money payment, quote unquote, hush money payment to Stormy Daniels, which is essentially like a porn star actress. I think that was what she did. So basically, I think the lawsuit that from the leaks that why the lawsuit is that Donald Trump paid a $120,000, something like around that number, to his then lawyer Michael Cohen, who then made the payment to Stormy Daniels, and essentially he broke the law, quote unquote, by basically saying that listing that as a legal expense on the bookkeeping side instead of basically something else. So basically he misclassified
Hmm.
that expense as legal expense, and apparently now that's criminal. And the local DA in New York, apparently is using some decade long laws before that's basically essentially making this not just a misdemeanor but a criminal, right? So is that what's going on?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think you hit the point on the nail there about it being a misdemeanor and the fact that the Attorney General is kind of not the Attorney General, like the New York State Attorney is going after this. It's a little bit mysterious as to why, just because this is already past like the statute of limitations for what in general, like if somebody were to get arrested for it, like the statute of limitations for this has already been like kind of over. So this itself is going to be a really really I guess a turning point for the upcoming election. I think this right here in general, I think it's going to spark a lot of Americans that even may not have voted for Trump. I think even Republicans right now, there isn't that many people on the Trump party right now. Like with DeSantis being like a pretty good candidate, like being well spoken and everything like that. This might be a push that a lot of people would then end up voting for Trump. I think this is something Trump actually wanted. I think it helps his case overall for his next election as well.
So last week, which is the week before this week, the grand jury convened on Tuesday, but I don't think they convened for Wednesday. And then the grand jury usually meets on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. But then they were hearing other cases and nothing about the Donald Trump case, which some people indicated that basically that just means that the case itself is not solid enough, and they're going to either try again this week with the more time for the DA side, district attorney side, to prepare for a case before the grand jury. And essentially, how a grand jury works, from my understanding, is that if at least half of the grand jury, more than half of the grand jury, voted to indict, and then former President Donald Trump will be indicted and then will be arrested. And then essentially, I think there was a legal procedure after that, including like a mugshot, and all the other, all the other perp walk, for example, could also be on the line. My question, Soham, is like, why has this never been done before? I know Donald Trump is a very controversial political figure, but there are also many presidents in the past in the U.S. that are very controversial. So why has changed now? Why do the legal system, the DA feel like it's appropriate to potentially arrest a former president?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a twofold answer there. One, in general, like just the logistics to be able to arrest like a former president is just so hard. Like the reason why Trump even found out was because the New York office supposedly had contacted the Secret Service saying that we are going to be coming here that time, right? So like just like logistically there, like in the past, I mean that was going to be a problem, right? And then the other part about this whole thing, yeah, I think the reason why it's for Trump specifically is Trump's a really, really polarizing figure. Like whichever way you want to look at it, you could love him, hate him, whichever wagon you want to be on. But at the end of the day, he's somebody that's kind of like split people on either side of him, right? And that I think nowadays we've seen like on the left side, the Democratic side, like Joe Biden's entire premise for getting elected was he is not Trump. Like during his whole election, that was probably one of the biggest like things that kind of like got him into the office in general, right? So I think that it just started to compound over time. Like now, like it feels like the Democrat, they've been taking over Twitter. Like they started like controlling a lot of social media apps. So I think now they're. I don't want to say those words, but it seems like they're starting to weaponize like the judicial system too, which is pretty concerning in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at historical democracies, historical great powers, right, the declining empires, as we mentioned on the show many times before, one of the characteristics is that people have lost faith in their judicial system, in their legal system, right? And I think a huge thing that has happened over the past couple of years, especially with Trump, is that there are many things that have proven that there are people inside the government who are really trying to work against him, and essentially bending the rules to make him pay. Right? If you have been in New York City, which I have been many times, if you have been in New York City, you know that there are many other concerns that are of great importance. Essentially, there's a crime-riddled city, right? And the DA is not doing anything. And DA in the U.S. is supposed to be indicting people who commit felonies in that specific district. In that case, the DA is responsible to indict people who commit crimes on subways, people who push people off the rails on subway stations, which is far more important, right? And there's so many people died because of that just in the past 2 years. And random attacks on the streets, gun control, all those different crimes in New York City. There's a lot of crimes happening. I'm not saying that I personally think Donald Trump's issue is not a huge issue. Like I think morally everyone can have their own interpretations, but basically indicting someone just because of a misclassification of a business expense, which I'm sure if you're a business owner you can easily make that mistake, right? And if in the future any business people run for president and become elected president, and after they are retired as a president, is everything about their business being digged up from before, every declassification, all that can become criminal. I think that is just, I think like many people said, it's basically a banana republic.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it sets a terrible precedent. The fact that the president's supposed to be one of the most like powerful people in the entire world, right? Like the fact that if you can go after him for something that isn't even genuinely that malicious, like even if you assume he had bad intent with it, at the end of the day, it was still just classifying something in the wrong bucket. I think there's probably God knows how many different like owners that do that in a malicious intent in general as well, right? It just makes no sense the fact that somebody that used to be the president of the United States can get indicted for something that small. Like if it was something like like he had like ordered like a murder or something very very serious charges, that's something then this kind of conversation becomes important to have. At that point, right? Because at that point, like where does the boundary come between like law and like if anyone's above the law? But in a situation something this small, it's exactly what you said, George. It's very concerning, and it becomes basically a banana republic.
I totally agree with you. I think okay, laws apply to everyone equally, right? And that means that if a former president, whoever he or she may be, committed something that's serious enough to be indicted about, then like so be it, right? Then that's I think everyone's fair on the same page. But I think in this case, it's very clear that the local DA of New York is using his personal. I would say I don't know what's exactly going on there, but maybe his personal grudges because he's a Democrat and he may want and the DA is an elected official, right? So I think in New York and in many places, in most states in the U.S., you elect public prosecutors which is a very different system from other democracies. And if you elect someone who basically runs on a campaign of, okay, I'm going to eventually, bring justice to people by bringing down potentially, for example, Donald Trump, that is something concerning, that because those people, those prosecutors specifically, might just want powers and big names for themselves to be known by the public so they can enter higher offices. But I think in the meantime, the potential damage to democracy and to basically like the rule of law, as I put it, is just significant. I think this is like just unacceptable.
Yeah.
For something that's small. If it's something legitimate, if something that he actually did that's like criminally wrong, then of course I think every American would be on the same page on that. But for this one, I think we're not.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, and I just feel like this is just gonna add a lot of fuel to the fire for a lot of people on Trump's like bandwagon.
Yeah, and I think we'll await this week on how things go. I think still the grand jury will reconvene this week. I mean, we're recording this on Monday. But I think Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, so a lot of things can happen this week. If something did happen, we'll definitely have an emergency episode walking everyone through it. So I think that's really interesting. So second thing I want to talk about, and before we dive into that, I think so. I'm like, do you think this? The reason I brought it up is I think this might not just be a political issue, right? There's also like business implications that potentially have in this. Like if they did bring charges toward Trump, which is a single event, but does that have any implications for the business community in general moving forward? For example, like will that make investors lose more confidence in investing money in the U.S. bonds or Treasury yields? Does that have any other implications that you are seeing right now?
Yeah, I think I don't know if it'll be exactly just from the arrest of like Trump in general, but like I think in general, yeah, the idea of like investors flowing money to the United States is starting to be a question. Like I think beforehand it was kind of like a no-brainer. Like like you always assume your country's treasury yield is the risk-free rate for that country, and from all the countries, the most risk-free would be the United States. And I think that right there has become like challenged. Like Xi Jinping talking with Putin saying, change we're not going to see, we haven't seen in 100 years is coming, right? Like things like that. Like I think this is starting to like show that part. Like China's making a step that their currency is going to become something more like involved in the whole like world economics, with Saudi Arabia considering using China's currency. Like Russia's ruble starting to be a part of the economy, like with like China, India doing trades with the ruble and things. So
Yeah.
I think this Trump arrest, what it's just going to do is just add. It might be the straw that breaks the camel's back, because somebody that used to be the president of your entire country, if they can get arrested, I'm sure like outside investors, they're going to be looking at United States, be like, this is a geopolitical nightmare right now. Like I don't know if I want to like put my money in this country. There's just too much going on.
Yeah, if you look at countries like Myanmar, which I think a year or two ago, their prime minister or their president, Aung San Suu Kyi, I think that was her name, was arrested, and I think sentenced to life by the military. There was a military coup essentially that happened in that country, and everything was upside down. People were like revolting, revolutionary. It's just there's protests on the streets and there's gunfires, right? Like no one wants the same thing to happen for the U.S. But if this is what's gonna happen, if the public justice system is gonna be turned around like this, and not saying that the laws are wrong, right? It's just like I think some really ambitious, some maybe too ambitious prosecutors were trying to use the law as a weapon. I think that brings a really bad case for the U.S. and this can happen in any democratic country. It's not specifically a U.S. problem. I'm just saying like this is just it's just wrong, right? And I think what you said just now is super important. And I'm really curious to see why the media is not really publishing like publicly. There's no mention, not a lot of mentions in the mainstream media about the President Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow. And I think that's such a big item. Like we can do the whole episode today, just for that, right? Like, so give us an overview about what happened on his visit to Moscow. So on.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, like majority of the visit was like behind closed doors, right? So we don't know like exactly what happened, but like at the end of their meeting, while they're outside, I was just caught on video Xi Jinping telling Putin, change that we haven't seen in 100 years is going to come. And I think like that reference right there is probably coming to something, George, we've talked about in the show about like a change in the world order, right? Like I think like USA's kind of been like, oh, the federal like not the federal, like the world reserve currency for a long time, kind of been like that number one. And it's starting to seem like those dominoes are falling. Like we're seeing the US economic system starting to struggle. Like you're seeing like Silicon Valley Bank falling, like some of the other like even bigger banks like being looking a little bit more like like struggling. Like First Republic looks like they're kind of struggling. Yeah, like all these kind of dominoes falling. I think that is like the big implication for why like like yeah, China and Russia feel a little bit stronger in the sense that there may be a change coming. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it's shocking on many level. One of them is the mainstream media or the media in general is not publishing this at all, which is shocking. But I think one big thing I was specifically interested in and also very shocked to see is basically what he said about like we're forming an alliance, right? And we're doing our own thing. So Russia and China are now in one pack. So it's not that's not just that, and then you're adding Saudi Arabia to basically the pool. Basically, I think Russia is going to be. So there's something about the petroleum. I think so. I'm not sure if you're aware. I think this Russia and China made a pact about gas, and I think either they're going to transact that in Chinese yuan. I think that has already been announced. Are you familiar with that particular deal?
Not in detail, but like yeah, overall, I think what the entire state basically was is that when Russia sells to China, it will be in the ruble, and when Russia buys, it will be like in the yuan, and basically vice versa. When China buys, it'll be in the ruble, and when China sells, it'll be in the yuan. So between like China and like Russia, kind of like you scratch my back, I scratch your back type of situation.
Okay.
And I think like the more like holistic like what's the word, like the importance behind this is if you take that one step back, the way kind of like currencies work is certain countries want their currency to be a bit more devalued because they're an export heavy country, and for them to be able to export to more countries and more countries to be able to afford their products, they want their currency to be worth a little bit less, so more countries can then afford all the products from that country, right? And so with like China and Russia kind of like doing these kind of trades with each other, both of these countries have been export heavy countries that have always tried to keep their currency a little bit lower. But with this kind of like move coming between these two countries, it seems like maybe like a play towards strengthening both of their currencies for going into the future. Like Russia in general, really, the ruble during like the peak of when the war first started, like the ruble completely fell apart, and like that could have been completely like catastrophic for Russia. But overall, like it started recovering a little bit, and it seems like now, both on the Russia side and the China side, they want to have a bit more of a strengthened currency for like whatever is going to happen in the next decade.
Yeah, and I was just reading the reports from Al Jazeera. I think it's a international newspaper. It basically says that China and Russia signed a historical agreement entering the new era, quote unquote, of their relationships. And I think so. Just like you said, the yuan purchasing is very important, and also the agreement also pushed forward the planned power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which would deliver 50 billion cubic meters of natural gas per year from Russia to China via Mongolia. And I think Putin said Moscow was ready to increase oil exports to Beijing after they have completed all agreements on the aisle. Basically, essentially after Xi's visits, they have signed all the agreements, and I think they also signed internet deals happening. And then they also signaled there will be more political cooperation, although not military cooperation, between those countries. And I think one country that's been sidelined from all this is the U.S. And I think Saudi Arabia signing deals with Russia on their own without the U.S. I also think like what we said, India buying pennies on a dollar of natural gas, the first to do so, I think, after Russia-Ukraine war. So like we discussed this many times, Soham, before on the show, but I think this meeting, specifically if you take a look at their meeting videos, essentially how they met and how the U.S. is completely sidelined from all this. Like, what is that saying for where we are moving forward on the geopolitical side?
Yeah, no, I think this is saying essentially it's starting to come together towards an alliance. Like since we were like little kids, for the past 10, 15 years, we've always heard about the BRIC countries, right? So like Brazil, Russia, India, and China. These were the emerging countries, like in terms of like the next economies that were going to be big and stuff like that. And in recent times, Saudi Arabia got added, so it became the BRICS instead of just BRIC, right? And so between these 5 countries, I don't think Brazil has played as much of a role in this, but I think a part of that reason is also because of the geographic difference because of how far Brazil is from the rest of these countries. With like China, India, and Russia kind of all being like neighbors of each other, it makes sense for the 3 of them to kind of be able to have a bit more in terms of like talk and want to have some kind of alliance, just because being neighbors, that's the whole reason why the Russia-Ukraine war started, right? You don't want your neighbor to be your enemy kind of situation. So like
Yeah.
that made sense for their three, and then Saudi Arabia kind of enters this picture just because they're kind of like right there in the middle of the basically the whole planet, and they're the oil and gas giant. They're the heavyweight for it, and that's kind of what's been the driving fuel behind why Russia's kind of been able to stay alive, even though like for a point the entire Europe and North America completely silenced and shushed them, like with like tariffs to the ground, right? Because Russia still had a bunch of natural resources. So what we're seeing is like now with China and Russia, they're it's an opportunistic game, right? Like if you see an opportunity, you're gonna want to take it, and it looks like Xi Jinping is starting to take the opportunity to kind of like see if there's genuine change that can happen in the world order.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of news that I was watching on Twitter. I was just searching it up. I think Mexico's president had just recently released a statement blaming U.S. On the arm transfers on like sending weaponry to Ukraine, and I think he also said my nation has more democracy than the U.S. I think just last week, and that's something that has not been reported on in media. Sorry, and then let me just read the news for everyone. Mexico's president said Tuesday that his country is more democratic than the United States. Basically, he was, rejected any U.S. comment even through the U.S. State Department, and they basically said that okay, we respect our own sovereignty, and there's more democracy in Mexico than it could ever exist in the United States. And I think that he also made some comments on Ukraine. And to be like for everyone who doesn't know, which I don't think anyone doesn't know, Mexico is on the border of the USA. It's a neighbor country, and why isn't anyone reporting on Mexico's president's comments towards U.S. aiding Ukraine and also the election reforms? Like, what do you think, Tom?
Yeah, no, in terms of media side, in that part, I think we've been on this like pod, just like we've been yelling it for a while now. Like, independent journalists on Twitter are like just seem much more reliable at this point than like that mainstream media. Like, you're only getting basically what they want to like hand feed you on this mainstream media kind of side, and the stuff that's completely been filtered by politicians, and I want to say the left in particular. For a majority of the news channels, I think there's some channels that are a bit more right leaning, like Fox and other ones. But for the most part, like it's complete filtered content that you're just never gonna be able to know like what's actually happening in the world. And so these independent journalists that are actually coming out, or like the smaller like publishing papers that are coming out with these kind of stories, it makes no sense why something so important doesn't get like brought up more. And the actual thing, what the Mexican like leader kind of was alluding to, I think that's becoming a big problem in general too, just because USA is slowly evolving more and more into a plutocracy where just the rich can kind of just like buy some form of power. Where like we're seeing like the billionaires that are coming up, they have a lot more influence than what's been like before at all. Like if you saw the congressional hearing for TikTok, right? Like the amount that Meta had kind of gone into lobbying for something like this too, right? It's pretty
Yep.
concerning when we like start looking at, is USA really as democratic and as free a market as we've always kind of like pictured?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting, points that you brought up. So it's like why on the media bringing more information about it. I think now everything that's remotely interesting, like this is why people turn to podcasts, is because podcasts you can talk about things that are not being covered in the mainstream media. Like on this show, we talk about the Nord Stream pipeline attacks, and I don't want this whole segments to be about U.S. again. But like I was on Wall Street Journal, which is a U.S. based newspaper, okay, and I was reading an article that's basically saying that okay, U.S. officials and German officials outlining how the Nord Stream pipeline was attacked, and essentially they were saying that okay, a couple people speaking Ukrainian language approached a German harbor city and then rented a sailboat, and then 3 days or 6 days after, the Nord Stream pipeline got blew up. And if you go to the comment section of that of Wall Street Journal, and obviously everyone commenting, most of them will be from the U.S., and they're calling the BS of the editors, of the writers who wrote that article, and they're like, how can you publish this propaganda that's clearly fed up to you by the people at the top? You're just repeating what people are telling you to write, right? You're not informing people of something subjective, something that's it's really true, which is I don't know what it is, but everyone kind of on Twitter, everyone on Reddit, on the social media that's not really censored by any way, they're saying that a pipeline has been blow up by USA, even including some Bloomberg interviews, which is shocking. I'm not saying they did, but Soham, like the Nord Stream pipeline thing, we haven't talked about for so many episodes up until this point. And I mean, like, what are your thoughts about just the Nord Stream pipeline and why it's been almost a year and we still haven't heard anything from officials about, been getting these articles that, okay, we're closing in, and it's people speaking Ukrainian language, so they must be Ukrainians, special forces or something. So what do you think, so?
Yeah, no, in terms of the propaganda side of it, I completely agree. I think it's been like really something to like kind of prop up the fact, like very strong Ukrainians, very like nationalistic, stuff like that. So I agree with that part of it. I honestly haven't been able to like read too much on Nord Stream pipe exactly for the reason kind of you're saying, where it's been silenced a lot, and it's just concerning, I think, to me overall, like on the bigger picture, the fact that whenever we like see these kind of like headlines, we don't get to know the actual, I guess, like the actual facts of the entire case. Like when like a lawyer were to like present facts in a court, they choose the exact way to frame their argument, right? It feels like newspaper article was supposed to be like an unbiased source of truth is now starting to become a framing, and it's like they're all op-eds now, just like opinionated pieces, and I don't even know like where to go to fix this, because I think this kind of stems more to the root of the problem being, where's the revenue coming for a lot of these like newspaper publishings, right? Like, so for the pipeline stuff, I think, yeah, like,
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think right now, because the news is how is it's how essentially the news is getting make money, how they monetize. It's a lot about based on clicks and shares and eyeballs, and I think negative information, like we said, has been covered a lot on this. But I do wonder why they're repeating the party line. They're like united front on many issues, like the Nord Stream pipeline, though. But it could be something underneath that we don't know yet. But I'm just saying that I don't know why they did it. Why maybe there's some rules against it. But I'm just saying that's why people are turning to mediums like Substack and podcasts. Anything that doesn't repeat the common lines towards things. So I just think it's shocking that only the podcast can bring the actual news these days, which is really shocking. So I think so. I'm like, there's also some news that happened today. I think regarding regional banks. I know we did a segment last week about regional banks. Actually, the last two segments about regional banks. So it's been happening pretty fast. I think today. Tell us more about the announcement regarding SVB. Actually.
Yeah, so I think First Citizen will end up buying like a majority of a lot of the assets that SVB kind of hold underneath. I think the like kind of like the motivation behind it is the FDIC basically is just coming in, kind of being like a shield around First Citizen, saying, we're securing all the deposits. Don't worry about anything like that. Just try to take it to the finish line so that like this can have like a bit more of a green pasture. Like overall, I think this is kind of good. And on the other side, the other part of too, for Silvergate, I don't know if you've heard, like MicroStrategy kind of paid back their like huge loan that they had with Silvergate, and that kind of like propped up their like bank a little bit as well. Like I think the stock was up 20-ish% after like those news.
Okay, that's very interesting, because I think I was reading about the SVB deal. So essentially, First Citizens Bank acquired a portion of SVB's assets, and then this bank, First Citizens Bank, it's mostly based in North Carolina, and it's owned by one family, and I think they only had $42 billion in assets 3 years ago, deposits, and now they will have $219 billion after the SVB deal. So it's actually a very good deal for them. And I think on the downside, there's downside protections as well. I think any losses from the credits and from the loans will be shared by both the bank and FDIC, which I think is a pretty good deal. And I'm shocked that they can't actually reach a deal this fast. And it's not like JP Morgan or anyone come out to save the deal, but it's actually a very small regional bank. So what does that tell the market? Is it calms them a little bit more, or does it still present problems ahead?
I think overall, like, I don't think any of the big banks want to touch this with a 12-foot pole. Like, after what happened with JP Morgan in the '08 crisis when they tried, like, bailing out Bear Stearns, like, at the time, maybe everyone like kind of applauds you for a bit, but afterwards, like, all the congressional hearings that Jamie Dimon had to go through, everything like that, I don't think any of the big banks kind of want the headache of SVB. And I'm kind of happy that like a smaller bank took it instead of like one of the bigger regional banks, just because it still allows for a much more competitive landscape for the banking sector. Because I think I've been on the pod for a bit too. Like I don't really like the idea of it all like, kind of like pooling into like just a couple banks. The way like a lot of people were like kind of hypothesizing might just like end up happening if bank runs were to start like becoming a bit more normal. So I'm happy it was somebody like a much smaller player, and I'm not too surprised. We did see that HSBC bought like Silicon Valley Bank's like UK portfolio for like $1 or €1. So yeah, I don't think there were a lot of bidders for this. I think there's too much of a headache in terms of everything overall.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And I think sorry, you mentioned something about First Republic before, right? So there's some news about First Republic Bank, which got rescued last week. But there's something new going on with First Republic.
Yeah, no. So First Republic has just been getting a lot of injection in terms of like capital. I think if you were like listening to like the Jerome Powell Fed announcement for the 0.25 quarter hike, they basically had said that we're gonna like keep all assets at par value. So like that was something else that kind of like helped with First Republic. But like essentially, a lot of depositors are still trying to leave, and the important thing has become one thing that's different in this like bank run or possible bank runs now versus back in the day is these are corporate bank runs. This isn't like a regional like residential people that are like running from the bank. These are corporate accounts, which is like worth like like hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars. And First Republic as a bank specifically was had like kind of like boasted low interest rates and like gave a lot of favorable terms. So a lot of high net worth people were kind of like starting to bank here. So like that kind of thing is like the reason why a lot of the bigger banks like J.P. Morgan and like even like the Fed coming and everything like that, they're starting to prop up First Republic as well because First Republic falling would be a much bigger disaster than something like Silicon Valley Bank falling itself. So we're seeing, I believe today morning itself or yesterday it was like 30 billion more like capital injection, just to kind of like keep First Republic going in case more depositors want to leave.
That's crazy. Yeah, I think the banking crisis is unfolding. I think it's a lot more calmer than 2 weeks ago. I think my prediction is I don't think the sort of bank run will happen in the near weeks or months. I think the macroeconomic side on the bank side, I think we are safe after this SVB acquisition. I think, but in that doesn't solve the problems that many banks still are invested or investing in very illiquid, dangerous assets, right? That can fall in value or has fallen in value, just like they haven't been brought up yet. If the Fed didn't bail out SVB's depositors, then I think this thing just gonna get a lot worse.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. So let's move into our next topic. I think it's Lyft hired new CEO as their co-founder stepped down. I think it's the big news items of today, and today's Monday. So they really came out with a bang with this news. And I think Soham, we talked about a couple episodes back about the founder resignation phenomenon, and I was talking to you about basically I think Instacart's founder resigned, CEO resigned as founder and CEO, and just remain as chairman. Essentially, he's pursuing a new startup as well. And those are just isolated incidents, but we're hearing more and more about the resignations happening, even for a company as big as Lyft. And if you're reading their statement, they said the economy is tough and the world is full of some uncertainties, and that's a real factor for sure. And then when you zoom in one click, the competitive environment is tough. We have a very aggressive competitor. And that's the new CEO spoke in an interview with the Wall Street Journal. And I think, and I think actually that's from the founder, not from the new CEO. So the founder said that, before or after they stepped down. So what does that tell you about, what's going on with Lyft and the broader, tech community market?
Yeah, no, I think that's in general like the ride sharing space has become much more competitive in the last little bit. I know that Uber and Lyft kind of won their one lawsuit in terms of the whole like having their people that they hired like to be contractors, not employees. I think that was like one of the few positives that the ride sharing industry has been seeing. But overall, I think it's just like telling us that it's hard to be like a ride sharing business like now, because now we're seeing competition not only on the car side, we're also seeing competition on the AI side. Like in terms of like self-driving cars that might want to do this themselves too, right? That would kind of change like Lyft's entire business model too. So it makes sense for them to try to, because like personally, I think the co-founders just like it was just too competitive environment for them personally. Like I think Lyft completely transformed from what their vision of it was into something different now. Like the environment's just too different for them. and you have like bring in like David Richer, like a seasoned veteran that used to be at Amazon, used to be at Microsoft, like kind of knows the like has like a network in the tech space a bit more, might be good because competing against Uber right now is Lyft is starting to fall behind just because Uber has added a lot of different features like Uber Eats and things like that that have really started like driving their revenue to becoming like a multifaceted like model.
Yeah, I think there's one thing really interesting for from the Wall Street Journal. I wanted to say that late last year, basically Lyft laid off more than 700 employees, or 13% of their staff, and scaled back on other businesses such as renting cars to customers, as a look forward to make as a look to weather a possible recession. Lyft stock has tumbled over 74% in the last 12 months, whereas Uber shares has only fallen around 10%. So I'm like, why is that? I'm actually very curious to see. Is that because Uber is more hedged? It has ride sharing, it has not only ride sharing but also have delivery businesses.
Yeah,
Is there a reason for that?
yeah, I think that's a big reason why. Like, in terms of Lyft being kind of like a pure play in ride sharing, it's becoming a lot harder just in general because I mean, yeah, overall, if you're not using your car, like now people are like really sticky with whichever one they use, and like if you had Uber on your phone, like you're kind of just sticking with it. Like, like back in the day, like Lyft was kind of like making a market share, like taking Uber's market share by being like a little bit cheaper. But now I think if they're on the same price, Uber has like a bit more features with like Uber's like XL or Uber Black stuff like that. I don't know if like Lyft has that or not because I personally use Uber as well. But like it's hard for like Lyft to be able like kind of be able to get enough people as well to work in these like smaller cities that they can actually like have enough of a market, enough people exposure that people can actually use the service itself too.
Yeah, I think is this a broader conversation to have though? So how much because it's not just about Lyft founders stepping down. I think the broader tech community, people are stepping down as founders. They're focusing on other ventures. Does it say something about the macroeconomy economics? Is it something that basically people are not seeing hope for the next couple of years for their business to bounce back? This includes startup founders, pre-IPO companies, post-IPO companies. It seems like we are around very round circle with all this. So does it mean that they're not optimistic about what's coming next for the economy?
Yeah, I think it's kind of on both sides. I think yeah, like personally, like the founders aren't as optimistic, and like I think the companies itself would do a little bit better without the founders being the main like captain in the situation. Just because founders are great as visionaries, as being able to, like like try to like create something out of nothing kind of situation. That's a little bit different from someone that's like a survivalist, someone that's like a general. You know what I mean? Like with interest rates this high, with capital being this hard to get, with funding being really hard to get. What becomes important is like going concern. Like, is your business gonna be able to like make it to tomorrow, keep the lights on, stuff like that. With like banking crisis like the like SVB, like you want like a seasoned veteran that's kind of battle tested in terms of making those hard decisions. I think like founders usually kind of have like a rosier vision, like a more high level, and that's not good for times kind of like where the economy is going to now.
Yeah, I think it just outlines about the uncertainties that really lies ahead for our economy. I feel like if you go around, and this is very different than '08, is that if you go around today, and if the U.S. haven't changed definition of recession, we will be in a recession, quote unquote, today. But if you look around, go out, shop and everything, I don't think people are really complaining much aside from the food prices being very high. Right, I just did grocery today. It was expensive. It was like, oh my god, I compare last year, just I mean, it's just crazy how much more it is. The gas is more expensive. But aside from that, I feel like everyday people are not feeling the squeeze. Although I do have some personal like stories hearing from friends of friends, all that. I'm hearing that some people are having real issues keeping up with the car loan payments because of the interest rates going up. I hear that there are defaults happening in buy now pay later platforms, such as Klarna and and others like that. People are just abandoning the ability. They're just abandoning their plan to pay for those services. And if you know how it works, is that if you bought something buy now pay later from Apple, Apple is not going to pay for that if you don't pay. Right, the fintech company who is powering Apple is going to pay for that, which is Affirm. So I think those are the stories I'm hearing about. Rising interest rates are hurting people. Or I think we are finally coming into a place where it's not just tech companies are getting hurt. It's not just large businesses like Disney today announced cuts of 7,000 employees, which are big numbers, right? for the affected employees, but I think right now it's getting into the average day people's lives, consumers. So what are you seeing or hearing from like folks around you or just colleagues?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is something we were talking about last week as well. I think the behavioral sentiment hasn't changed enough or drastic enough in terms of like the way the actual prices are. Like, yeah, people complain about the food because that's something you're seeing every day, right? Like, like you're buying a burger, you're buying your groceries like every week, every day type of thing. So those costs are hitting you like on a daily basis. You're starting to see those differences. But the other things like like your like luxury items, like maybe you want to buy a TV, buy a new laptop, seeing those prices go up, like you don't really notice because you don't really remember what the old prices used to be. Like what you were talking about, like the used car. I think I saw like interest rates are almost 14% for some of these used cars, which is just insane if you think about it. You're paying 14% more on the ticket price every single year for this one car. Like it's become like a much bigger decision when it comes to like purchasing those like bigger scale items, right? And as the savings start depleting, because I think we were talking about this, right? Like by the end of this year, it's like projected a lot of people will be like kind of done with their savings, like kind of like run through it. I think that's when we're gonna see like a really different like economy like really starting to emerge.
So I guess the best advice for folks who are listening to the podcast is just to save up as much as you can for this year, because we're I think at least for me, I'm anticipating something that's really hard coming down on the second half of this year, probably even like Q3 and Q4 of this year, which is coming really soon. So I mean, my advice would be just to save up as much as I can, save a little bit, save a portion every week. I'm actually gonna do that myself. Gonna save up a lot, just to weather the storm. Like Soham, what's your personal advice to like our listeners who are thinking like what's ahead for this year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is not financial advice by any means, but one thing I've been starting to do is like maybe like dollar cost average a little bit. I want to like start just like getting into the market, just because like I have enough like money that I can like put a bit more into the market and like know that I'll be kind of okay. But yeah, and if you do have that much, I think now is like the right time to start putting something into the market, just because one, like you never know when the bottom is, and it might go down another like 10, 15%, maybe 20% from here. But I mean, at the end of the day, it might not. Like it's good to like start getting some kind of exposure into it, and it's like like on like a weekly basis, start like building like some kind of a portfolio up. So if you have the means to do it, I would definitely suggest that. And if not, then like yeah, I agree. Just like holding on to cash is important right now. Like I wouldn't advise any kind of like like lavish purchases. Like maybe that third car can wait. Maybe like upgrading the house, something like that could wait a bit, because it seems like right now is not the economy to kind of go close to your means.
Yeah, I think and just rethink about debt. I think it's another thing, because like debt, for example, if you get a not fixed rate mortgage, a year or 2 years ago it was only 3% or 2%. Now it's like 7-8%, could go a lot higher,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that's something people are not anticipating. Like, why is my interest payments a lot higher compared with last year? So those are all invisible costs, and I think like at least for my business, we're paying down debt as fast as we possibly can, just to get rid of debt in the coming months, and just to really free about reinvesting our cash. So as a business, that's where we're heading.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same thing is going towards individuals as well. Like, just pay off the debts that you could, right? The unsecured debts, all that. Like, I run a loan business before still, right? I understand how it works, and I think it's just very, very important to do that. Not financial advice, obviously, but yeah, those are our points. And for this week, we're trying out a shorter version of the podcast. So if our listeners have any suggestions, if you think shorter is better, if you think longer is better, definitely write us on Twitter. You can go to the description of the podcast, follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn, and let us know your thoughts. So thank you so much, Soham, for the insights for this week. We have some really interesting points I think our listeners will like. And if you have any thoughts, definitely write to us in our podcast channel, and our Twitter, LinkedIn, and everyone can listen to this podcast. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
Perfect.